Thank you so much. No pressure at all to talk about disruptive innovation right before lunch. So apologies that I'm the one thing standing in between you and lunch. But what I thought I would start my talk out today was just talking about this concept of disruptive innovation. Because when you hear the phrase disruptive innovation, it's one of the biggest buzzwords that's out there right now. You read it all the time in media. Entrepreneurs always want to say, I'm disruptive. And yet most people, I would argue, use the term incorrectly. So what I want to do first is just set a very strong definition in simple ways of what disruption is, and then we'll talk about how it's transforming higher education. So when I say the phrase disruptive innovation, what I mean is a force that transforms a sector that's characterized by things that are complicated, expensive, deeply centralized, and inaccessible, such that it can only serve people who have lots of expertise or lots of wealth. And disruptive innovation transforms that by bringing out into the world things that are far more affordable, convenient, accessible, simple, such that it can bless the lives of many people who never could have accessed the original thing. So to illustrate the concept, what I've put up here is just a series of concentric circles. And what I want you to do is imagine that innermost circle, the one right there in the center, represents those people who have the most expertise or wealth in a field. And that as we go out these circles, it represents people who have less expertise or less wealth. And what we see in almost every industry is that the innovation starts in that center circle, serving people with lots of money and lots of expertise, and then disruptive innovation decentralizes the world to serve those non-consumers that couldn't access the original. So in the world of computers, for example, before computers even existed, we all existed out in the outer circle, and whenever we had computations or calculations to make, we would just whip out our slide rule on the spot, and we would do our computations. And then the advent of the mainframe computers in the 1940s and 50s by IBM created the computing industry, but those machines, they were so big that they would literally fill an entire room, and they cost $2 million to own a computer. So most of us were non-consumers. We just didn't have access to computers. Now this changed a little bit with the first disruptive innovation, which was called the mini computer. Mini computers were about the size of this table here, about a big file cabinet. They cost $250,000 to buy. So now comparatively more people had access to computers, but still the vast majority of us were in these outer circles, unable to access computers. And then the big disruptive innovation came in the form of the personal computers. And for the first time, computing came to you at your desktop instead of you having to go to the computing center. They only cost $2,000, so a lot more people could start to buy computers. And they were so simple that even someone as simple as I am could finally use the computers. But I have a question for you all. How many people remember those early personal computers? Raise your hands. Oh, we have an honest audience. I appreciate that. So do you remember how primitive those early machines were? They could barely do like word processing. You'd sit there typing, and every once in a while you'd have to stop and coax the thing to catch up with your fingers. It wasn't even good enough for a basic application like that. And that represents the other thing about disruption, is that when disruptions appear, everyone in the inner circle looks at these things, and they say, why would I possibly ever want that? It's so primitive, it's not nearly as good as what I can do with these mainframe computers. It can't do any of the computations or calculations that it can do. But what they forget is that disruptive innovations improve faster than our lives change. So what at one point is not good enough for the majority of us, over time gets better and better and better, and can start to do more complicated problems and tasks. And as it does so, people in that inner circle rush out to the outer circle because they're delighted with something that's more affordable, convenient, accessible, and can now at last do what they need done. And that's how the transformation occurs. And so we've seen it, of course, continue. Laptops, and now you all carry around mobile phones with you that have more computing power in your pocket than sent the first man to the moon. That's how amazing that this force is and how incredible disruptive innovation is. And the really great thing about it is that if you get bored of me at any point for the rest of the talk, you can take out your computer that's in your pocket and just become productive again. So don't worry about it at all. Now, we've seen disruptive innovation in lots of different industries. I've just put up a list of them here to show this transformation process. But just to take one of them, if you look at cars, automotive sector, most of the cars many, many years ago, the dominant cars were made out of Detroit in the United States. Companies like GM, Ford, Chrysler. And they were disrupted by the Japanese automakers, Toyota, Honda, and so forth. And what's interesting is Toyota did not start at the high end with the high-flying Lexuses. They started the low end with crummy cars called Coronas that rusted really quickly, were not very good. But for people who couldn't afford gas-guzzling cars from Detroit, they were better than their alternative, nothing at all. And they got their start there, and they got better and better with the Corona to the Tercel, Corolla, Camry, 4Runner, Avalon, then the Lexus, and literally changed the world. Interestingly enough, Toyota has been being disrupted over the last several years by the Koreans, Kia, Hyundai, and so forth, who aren't being too shy about it. Isn't it time someone did to Lexus what Lexus did to Mercedes, they're asking. Korean cars started the low end, they're getting better and better, and underneath them, I wouldn't be surprised to see Chinese, Indian companies come up and disrupt them. So we see this wave over and over again. Now, there's one place disruptive innovation has not applied historically. And I'll give an example. It's where you've lacked what we call an upwardly scalable technology. So in the case of hotels, for example, for many, many years, there was no disruptive innovation. In that inner circle, you might have said there's Four Seasons, and then we would have Marriott on the next circle. And then in the United States, we have Holiday Inn, which are cheap motels, and then Motel 6 maybe after that. And what's interesting is the theory of disruptive innovation would have said when Holiday Inn entered in the 1950s at the low end, they should get better and better over time and go up market and disrupt the Four Seasons. But that clearly and plainly has not happened. Holiday came in at the low end, and they've stayed at the low end. So what happened? Well, as we've studied the problem, there was no technology enabler that allowed them to take a low-cost value proposition and get better over time. If they wanted to get better, they had to actually replicate all of the cost features of the Four Seasons. The fine dining restaurants, the concierges, the swimming pools and spas, the people that would literally go around and spritz Evian water on your face whenever you get hot. And it turns out that those things are quite expensive. And so instead, they just came in, they decentralized the world, but didn't disrupt it. But that all changed, of course, a few years ago with Airbnb. And now we're starting to see disruptive innovation hit the hotel world as well. Now, how does this all relate to higher education? Well, I would argue we're in the early parts of disruptive innovation in higher education that's going to radically transform how we learn. So in the past, you had to go to a place like Harvard, i.e., you could imagine state universities in the United States, community colleges. We've seen decentralization, but not disruptive innovation. If one of these upstart universities on the outer circle wanted to disrupt, they couldn't. They actually had to replicate all of the cost features, the research, the beautiful campuses of a Harvard. But online learning has fundamentally changed that equation and allowed upstart institutions to come in and fundamentally serve lots of students and transform the delivery of learning. And online learning is growing extraordinarily rapidly, fundamentally transforming how students learn. So this is in the United States, where online learning, now a third of students take at least one online course as part of their college or university experience. And if you look at master's students, over a quarter of master's students are fully online. And it's growing extremely rapidly, even as post-secondary enrollment in the United States, colleges and universities overall, have actually been in decline. So we're seeing online learning growing and universities declining a little bit. This isn't all bad news, though. From my sense, it's going to be an amazing thing for learning in the future, because online learning offers the promise, not the guarantee, but the promise of fundamentally transforming the learning experience to be far more learner-centered. One way it can do that is by personalizing learning. So big idea is not a controversial one when you think about it, but that we all have different learning needs at different times. Some of us learn really quickly, other of us learn really, really slowly. We have to grapple with a concept for a long time until we understand it. And the reason we have these differences is that we all have what cognitive scientists call different working memory capacities. Literally the ability in the front of our brain to absorb information in active memory and manipulate it. And we all bring what cognitive scientists call, it didn't show up there, but long-term memory. Literally the ability in the back of our brain to store our background knowledge and be able to be able to recall it. And as a result of all of us having different background knowledge, we all bring different conceptions, and I would say misconceptions, into a learning experience. And so if I lecture at you, as I am now, and I say something that is unfamiliar to you, the human brain's natural tendency is just to glom onto the concept, even if it's not even salient to the point that the speaker is trying to make. And so we develop a misconception or a gap. And so because of these different learning needs at different times, we really need to personalize learning if we want all students to learn and be able to develop to their full potential. But the challenge is that our education systems were literally modeled intentionally after factories, with the assumption that if we batch students up in what we call classrooms or courses and deliver the same thing to the same way at the same time to them, that we could standardize the way we teach and test, which would allow us to do mass education. And it did allow us to do mass education, but it also created a lot of downsides. One of them is what I call the Swiss cheese effect, which is that students, because they were all being taught in the same way at the same time, would develop holes in their learning. And the big challenge for a teacher at the front of the room is, I know you all have holes in your learning, but I have no idea which holes each of you have. And so to personalize for it in this current construct is just impossible. That's the exciting thing about online learning. Because it's inherently modular, I can move at the path and pace that makes sense for me. And as you'll see in a little bit, Sanjay Sarma can move at a much, much faster path and pace and learn things much quicker. And so this is a screenshot from the Khan Academy, where it shows actually the individual learning trajectories of each child and how they can adapt and change for each of those different trajectories. And so the student highlighted in blue in this particular 5th grade classroom, he was actually 4th from the bottom at the beginning of his math class, at the beginning of the school year in this particular classroom. And in a traditional school, he would have just been grouped into the bottom math class, and he would have been left there for the rest of his academic journey. But it turned out he just had a few gaps in his learning. And once he was able to fill those in, he started soaring. And you can see at day 70 of this particular screenshot, he was 4th from the top of his math class. So literally, we'd been doing education malpractice on him. Literally, what we do is we have a system where the time is fixed and the learning is highly variable. So we deliver content to students, we test and assess, students move on to the next grade, the subject, course, the body of material, and then only afterward do they get the results. And it's sort of like an autopsy. What percentage of the material did you get wrong? What percentage don't you understand? And the very neat thing about online learning, if we use it right, is it can allow us to move to what I call competency-based or mastery-based learning, where we flip the equation. The learning becomes fixed and the time becomes variable. So we still offer learning experiences to students. We still test and assess, because testing and assessment is a critical part of learning. But now we do it so that students can get real-time and interactive feedback, which informs what they do next. And students only move on once they actually master the body of material on which they're working. Fundamentally changes the equation. The other thing online learning can do is it can start to allow us to create very different instructional models that allow us to serve students much, much better. And so this is one example of a disaggregated staffing model, where we say, right now we ask professors to do lots and lots and lots of things. and it's an overwhelming job. But instead, could we disaggregate them so that we have content experts that curate and build courses? We have mentors and learning coaches that help students make progress as they're learning. We have assessment specialists whose sole job is to evaluate rich projects and deep expressions of work to say, have you truly mastered something, and what else do you need to do to show mastery? And then instructional designers that take what we know from cognitive science and actually redesign learning in very different ways. The other things it does is, so that's the personalization it can bring. The second thing it can do is really extend access and equity. So any student anywhere in the world can now access a high quality learning experience. And thirdly, it can start to make the learning far more affordable as it embeds itself in very new models that change our assumptions of how learning should look and work. And there's a whole slate of new providers, some disruptive, some not, that are emerging, that are transforming that value proposition around learning in a variety of ways. I've put a screenshot of just a bunch of them up here, but there's open learning marketplaces like Udemy, for example, where you can learn virtually anything. Udacity, which works really on technical skills at the cutting edge of technology, like self-driving cars and things of that nature. Partnerships between lynda.com and LinkedIn that acquired them, and LinkedIn Learning that allow you to do corporate learning real time as you're going on, so you don't have to take your time away from a job to keep progressing in your career. Things like General Assembly as a coding boot camp, the Minerva Institute, which is redefining the liberal arts education for about a quarter of the price of that education right now for university students. Guild education that is allowing people in corporations to take actual university credit, but have deep mentorship and coaching models around them as they do so to keep them motivated and engaged. Simultaneously, there's a whole bunch of companies that have emerged to help universities make this switch into online learning as well. On the right-hand side, you have companies like 2U, the leader in online program management or academic partnerships, that I would argue have really helped universities sustain what they currently do. And then you have new entrants, Coursera, Noodle Partners, that are fundamentally trying to help universities innovate on that affordability access. Because the reality is that most universities have taken online learning and not used it to disrupt what they currently do, but instead to sustain how they currently operate. So it's sort of like we've when the first movies were created, what we did was just put cameras in the back of the room and recorded people in the middle of plays, on stage plays. And that's sort of how universities have, for the most part, treated online learning as something not to personalize, to still do the lecture model, and something to sort of ignore a lot of the lessons from instructional design, and not to really take advantage of the affordability potential of this new medium. And I wonder in the back of my head, will these new mobile learning players that are emerging herald a really big disruptive change that could even shake up the industry even more? And so we see these things starting to emerge. Smartly, which offers the world's first free MBA online. Just in the pocket of your phone, you can take it. Pensar Learning, that helps construct custom mobile learning micro course experiences. Duolingo to learn any language in the world. And what these do that a lot of the online learning platforms have not done is they embed active learning principles and sound instructional design into the learning itself at a dramatically lower cost that I think could fundamentally flip learning on its head in some pretty exciting ways. At the same time, you see a lot of the other folks really starting to evolve and innovate in exciting ways. And so this could be a perfect segue actually for Sanjay when we come into the conversation. But MOOCs got a lot of hype, massive open online courses when they first launched. And then people sort of went through the trough of disillusionment, you might say, and say, what good are MOOCs anyway? And I actually think MOOCs are an incredibly exciting point right now as they're evolving to really figure out what their value proposition is. MIT and through edX launched the MicroMasters a couple years ago, I guess at this point, to fundamentally make the beginning of a master's program incredibly low cost and in a way to allow students everywhere to access the best of a master's experience. And then if you want to continue to pursue it, to go into a master's program with at least a quarter of the cost immediately stripped away. You see folks partnering to launch the iMBA, Coursera, for example, partnering with the University of Illinois to fundamentally lower the cost of getting an MBA in really exciting ways. And then the Global Freshman Academy, also powered by edX, that makes the freshman year of college absolutely free to try and very low cost if you want to convert those credits into real learning that can bring you into a university, even if you don't have a high school degree. And so fundamentally, we're seeing this innovation. It's messy, it's working itself out, but I think the trajectory is clear that it is going to disrupt education in some pretty exciting ways as it allows us to personalize, dramatically expand access and equity, and make this far more affordable so that all students can benefit from the learning experiences that in the past only a few could. And so I'm excited about this future and excited to bring Diego and Sanjay up so we can continue the conversation about it. Thank you so much.
That's great.
I don't know who decided that I should moderate this, this panel, because, I mean, it's a big challenge coming from a traditional university model.
Well, you guys have innovated, though, for quite a while. Yeah. So.
No, thank you very much, Michael. That was super interesting. Sanjay, is your 16-year-old daughter going to go to traditional college?
To be perfectly honest, I hope so. She's 16, so she has other ideas. No, she will. You know, I don't think we're at a place where we can say, do your stuff online. It would be very hypocritical of me to not say in public that my child, I want her to go to college. But I think that we're a few years away, but we're getting there, where online is going to rival many colleges. I don't think it's going to rival all the great colleges, because there's something that happens in person. There's some magic happens in the coffee shop, in the conversations of professors, in the lab, the startup experience, etc. But I do hope my 16-year-old will go to college.
Now, just a simple, very basic question. What do you think the university standard model offers to an average bachelor student? Is it personal fulfillment, an intellectual challenge, a partying and dating experience, a combination of the previous? I know, Michael, because we had this conversation before, that you are quite researching in this area.
Topic of my next book.
Yes.
So it's an interesting question. What we found, so let's set the stage bigger. If you look at the surveys that come out, there's freshman surveys, for example, every year, and according to them, the percent of people going to college to get a job has soared. It's now roughly 90% of students are going because they want a job. In our research, though, we found that it was a lot more textured than that. Most of those students entering college don't really have a conception of what job is. And so that's something that they'll fill out on a survey, but it's actually not as deeply held as people think it is. And we found it was much more textured based on their circumstance and the struggle that they were experiencing. And there's a set of students that I think Sanjay is right about in referencing, who they want to get into the best college for them, and that for them means the brick and mortar experience and the coming of age experience and the opportunities to reinvent themselves with new groups of people and explore fundamentally who they are and what they want to be and so forth. And my read of it from the research is that that's not going away. My read of it from the research also, though, is that that's a much smaller percentage of the population than we traditionally have thought about. And we tend not to think about all the students that either don't have the opportunity to go to college or are going because they really need to get away from something that's bad in their life, or they're trying to step it up so that they can get out of a minimum wage track or something like that. And so for those students, college is a little more transactional, but it's probably, to think that they should go through a traditional four-year experience is probably not the right mental model. I think it's going to be much more shorter bursts of learning in the future that interweaves with work in much more of a lifelong learning continuum. That is what they're searching for in the future. And I hope that there will be opportunities for them to have the benefits of a campus as part of that for periods of time where they can explore themselves and think about what their passions and purpose are.
Yeah, and maybe I'll just pick up on that, Diego, and say that I agree with you, Michael. I mean, first of all, from a physiological perspective, you know, this is our prefrontal cortex, and it grows in between ages 16 and 20, 21, 22, when we become mature. Some would claim mine has never grown in, which is a whole other story. But this prefrontal cortex, this is why we, you know, we're careful about letting young people drive, alcohol. Of course, we send them to war, but that's a whole other story. But the question is, how do we want to handle that period, which is a very formative period? And exactly to your point, I mean, the vast majority of humanity until 50 years ago finished, if they finished school and they were the daughter or a son of a cobbler, they went to work. And that worked, and they became cobblers. Now, and then the other extreme is you go to college, which is for the upper class who could afford it. But I think there's a beautiful middle that is emerging. And the Swiss, to me, and the Germans, but particularly the Swiss, have a model, which is apprenticeship, where you have a bit of both. You have the on-the-job learning, but you're also incubating the growth of the human mind and shaping it. So I hope some spectrum like this will emerge. It's not there yet.
Yeah.
Yeah, but sorry, really quickly on this apprenticeship model, because you might have wanted us to disagree, but we're agreeing a lot. This apprenticeship model, I think, will answer one of the big questions we're facing right now, which is how do you pay for students to get this learning and to get it while they actually have to have living, be making a living wage to support them as they have kids, families, whatever it might be as they go out into the real world. And so this notion that you can be working and learning and being paid for it, I think is going to be an important piece of the puzzle to figure out.
The reason I asked you about the experience, the bachelor's experience, is because, I mean, with this theory, the value addition of a university is going to remain there, but it's going to become more exclusive than it is now, actually, because a big part of the model is basically going to be very cheap, very accessible, but that part of the model is going to be online. So what we want to offer is not really education. It's not just the technicalities. It's basically the experience. And so, for example, let's take the Minerva model that you mentioned before. And for those of the audience that are not familiar, Minerva is basically an non-traditional model for bachelors. What they do basically is you go around the world to 8 different places in a semester, and all the academic content you receive it online, but you have the personal experience with other students that are traveling around the world with you. No? So do you think these students of the Minerva model to whom this model is attractive are a niche, or is a possibility to scale them up?
It's a good question. So the way Minerva has designed itself is to be extremely exclusive and elite. I think it's like 2% get in. What is MIT, 7% or something like that? Yeah, so Minerva is $10,000 a year, so it's significantly less expensive, and it is more elite. That having been said, what I think Minerva points to is that this notion of a blended experience, I think, will be a large part of the future as online learning improves. And I wrote my piece for Forbes today, my column in Forbes today, was about how the partnerships between places like WeWork and 2U, where 2U students that formerly were fully online now will have a co-working space to go to. And it doesn't replicate the campus of an MIT, but it will replicate many of the social features that are so important in a place like an MIT. And by the way, they will be alongside people who are actually working in real jobs where they can collaborate on projects and learn about those different career paths and pursuits and have social engagement and community, such that I think in the longer run, this sort of online blended experience, it won't be, it will never be as good as a place like MIT because of it's not just the beauty of the buildings, but it's more the network that you get exposed to, but that's always been true. It's more that actually the experience itself, I think, will actually be quite phenomenal and accessible to many, many more people.
And maybe what I'll add to that is MIT, about 20 years ago, we decided to give a curriculum away for free to the world through something called Opencourseware. And it's been downloaded by several 100 million people. So people said, why are you giving all the knowledge away? And what we said was, and it took us some time to figure this out, is it's not the knowledge that makes MIT, because knowledge should be open. It is the act of creating knowledge.
Okay, yeah.
And so we're in a very sort of interesting place. So we want to graduate computer science students who are the first in the world to have learned on a quantum computer. We want to graduate chemists who have used the latest scanning tunneling electron microscope. So this is or the latest microscope technology. So this is where we want to be, and that's not scalable. But I do think that the rest of the experience we can be a lot more intentional about. And as Michael just said, the Minerva folks just wrote a book called Building an Intentional University.
I think that's right,
and
yeah.
I think that's a really great book, and we have to really think about how do we create the experience.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. Can I switch a bit to platforms that Michael was mentioning in his presentation? Sanjay, you're the thinking head behind many of the amazing things that MIT is doing in this regard, but you were one of the founders and you're a member of the board of EDX that was mentioned before in the presentation. When did you found EDX? It was 6 years ago?
Yeah, edX was founded in 2012, summer of 2012.
Yes. So my question is, Sanjay, what was the objective and the vision that you had for EDX at that time?
Because we had done Opencourseware in 2000, 2001 timeframe, we knew there was a hunger for learning. We also believe very much MIT is where Opencourseware comes from, but also where open source software comes from. Mm-hmm. And so our deep passion was in creating a non-profit, open source way to make knowledge available to the world as inexpensively as possible. That's really what drove us. Yeah. So edX is a non-profit. Its software is open sourced. It was established by MIT and Harvard, and it has 120 university partners, so our quality is very high. We have many of the top universities in the world. And our most important thing is we believe that educated people around the world will make the world a better place. Mm-hmm. And so that was it. And then we figured the rest out. How do we pay for it? All the other stuff came later.
Then let's take maybe the Coursera model, because if not EDX, it's too good for everybody. And no, but just another question regarding this, because it was an amazing tool actually, and it has been an amazing tool for schools around the world, for iUniversity, for example, for instance, to spread the word on the sort of things that we did. So it was sort of a marketing tool as well, And we actually attracted many people to get to know our institution, and I think that was a great positioning for us. No, but how do you see schools positioning in these open platforms from now on? No, and for example, Michael, I don't know, what is your? We also had this from our conversation before. What is your experience with this kind of platforms?
Well, so two thoughts. For universities that are at the cutting edge of creating knowledge, I think these platforms are terrific, right? They can create knowledge and allow people to remix them in a variety of ways to have amazing learning experiences. That's wonderful. I think the reality for lots of colleges and universities is that people will, and I think correctly so, question what is the value proposition that they're offering. I think I'll speak only in the United States context for the moment, but I think up to 25% of colleges and universities are at grave danger for going out of business in the next 20 years. Clay Christensen, my mentor, says more aggressive than that, but I think he's a little off. But directionally, I think that's true. So the second question is then, as we create the platforms, how do we do so? And my criticism of the platform so far not at edX, of course, but is that a lot of them have not embedded in the design of them the instructional design principles that we know from the cognitive science literature about how to create really good platforms. And so they've been overly video-based. They haven't taken advantage of techniques like active learning by asking you questions. So the mobile platforms that I suggested before, every 7 seconds you're answering a question. So you're deeply engaged in creating the information. Whereas some of these courses, and I've taught on the Coursera platform myself, it's very passive. You're sitting back watching a video, and yes, they've chunked up the videos so that they're shorter, but it's still a video, and video is a very useful medium when you want to show someone how to do something. It's a good medium to connect socially and emotionally, but it can actually overload the brain if you're a novice learner in a topic, because you're getting both visual and oral information at the same time that overloads working memory capacity. And so we've sort of treated it as the one-size-fits-all way of doing learning, because it's easy. I speak, I already give a lecture, I'll just do that into the camera. And the other reason I think is because institutions of higher learning, they're really good at research, but they're not really good at teaching for the most part. And so they don't actually know sound principles of pedagogy. They know how to be great researchers. And so we haven't had, Sanjay really knows learning, but most people building these platforms have not had that experience.
Yeah, and actually I'd say that I only know learning because I realized I did not know learning. Although I'd been a professor for 20 years, I went back and we did a lot of research because I wanted to understand the science behind the platform. And frankly, most professors are not taught how to teach. In fact, most education researchers do not know the most recent results in cognitive psychology. It's a tragedy.
Yeah, just Sanjay, actually evolving this conversation. You are one of the big supporters and creators of the concept of MicroMaster that Michael mentioned before, and that we, from our perspective at our university, find really, really interesting. Can you tell us about this concept and what kind of applications do you see happening?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thank you. Yeah, so the MicroMasters is, we took a 2-semester professional master's degree. Today, we have to admit students at the beginning of the first semester, but we don't know who these people are. We don't know what their scores, I can't really judge the letters of recommendation because we don't know who wrote them. We don't know the university. So what we said was, we'll take the first semester and make it all MOOCs. And instead of admitting students at the beginning of the first semester, we'll invite the whole world to take the first semester. At the end of the first semester, we have a proctored exam, which is very difficult. All the courses are difficult. If you finish, we give a new credential we've invented called the MicroMasters, which it's an MIT X MicroMaster. It's not a degree. But once you finish, and it's a difficult thing to get, once you finish, we say, go ahead and apply to MIT. Because now we know how you did. We see your click streams, etc. And if you apply, we admit you, we give you credit for the semester, and you finish in one more semester. So we launched it, and now there are 50 MicroMasters from 25 universities in 4 continents. And we have literally dozens of universities saying, listen, the folks you don't admit, because we only admit 20. We have almost 500,000 people enrolled in our MicroMasters.
Very interesting admissions process.
It's a completely inverted admissions process. So anyway, so it's doing well, but I think about this. This is the first major innovation in the degree space for universities. We've got to be a lot more agile than this.
Let me end up with a question, with the same question actually that I started with. Michael, your 4-year-old twins in 14 years time.
We'll go somewhere.
Do you think they go to a college?
Honestly, I don't know. I hope that they feel the freedom to think that a gap year at minimum is something that they can explore, so that they build the understanding of why they would be going. I think it's not something that we utilize enough. I hope I've done my work and that there's more affordable options that are out there. And if they end up at a place like MIT, I'll be thrilled to death. I'll make one plug for a moment, because Sanjay and I live in the same town. I've gotten to know him a little bit over the last couple of years. And I'm just blown away by the MIT model, because it's it's not just a research university. It's applied research with a real sense of its mission that is coherent throughout the institution. And if my kids were lucky enough to go to a place that understood that top to bottom, it wasn't sort of a little bit here and a little bit there and a little bit this, that would be amazing. And I'd be happy to pay for something like that.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And we'd love to have them.
Thank you very much to both of you. It's a real honor having you here, and we hope to see you very soon.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.